Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together. Well, hey, and welcome, community groups.
Hey, everybody.
We're almost finished our Psalms of Ascent series.
That's right. This weekend we had, and one more coming up.
Yeah, and Sam, you were looking at Psalm 127 this past Sunday. It's kind of like the middle of the Psalms of Ascent. And such a rich psalm. I think we see so much in this psalm, but one particular thing that I would love to just focus on is just this idea of, the Lord building the house. It says in verse 1 here, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And so, I'm just curious around, how do we know as God's people, when are we guilty of maybe not allowing God to build his house? Or when do we seem to, take over? How can we be sure that we're allowing God to build his house?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it, you say his house, I think it definitely relates to building the church, but I think this is also just a word on work in general and the way that we conduct ourselves and our lives and the things we put our hands to I think the question for us to ask ourselves is, are we making plans and doing stuff and then asking God to bless it?
Right. Or
are we seeking the leading of God and saying, God, my life is an offering to you. How would you have me spend my time, and how would you have me labor and work, and what is it that you want to do here in our church or in my work and in the things that I put my hands to? So I think it's really that posture of are we, doing everything we do because this is what we're going to do, and then we just say, God, would you just put your hand on it and bless it? Or are we looking to him and saying, waiting on him and saying, we want to be faithful to you? Because I think a lot of times we can get so busy doing good stuff and fill our time with all sorts of wonderful things, or just things in general. But it's possible in that we would miss God and what he's actually maybe uniquely calling us and asking us to do because we've just so filled our time with stuff. So how do we know, to get back to your question? I think it really is a posture of the heart.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, I think my mind goes immediately to Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel.
Yeah,
right?
we talked about that in the message.
Yeah. And I mean, that's it. Where here's all these people banding together to literally build this tower without seeking God. There's no desire to glorify him. It's really to make a monument unto themselves. And so, I think that fits with what you're saying.
Absolutely.
It's are we seeking God's will and his direction and seeking to glorify and honor him, or are we building for our own purposes in whatever that might be?
For sure.
Our work, our families,
that's
what have you.
Yeah, and the psalmist will continue in those directions. But I think there is two approaches to work that a lot of people have. One is Babel, as you just said. But another one that Eugene Peterson pointed out, and we talked about on the weekend, is you could look at the picture of Buddha. It says Babel or Buddha. And I think at first reading of that opening verse, you could almost feel like, well, God's building it anyway, so I don't need to do anything.
Right.
And so the extreme resistance to Babel and building this monument onto ourselves can be, to downplay my job and my role in work, in building the house, because God's doing it. But the vision that we see through Scripture of work is one of partnership between God and humanity, that he's actually inviting. I mean, talking about Genesis, if we go back to Genesis chapter 1, God's first command to humanity is to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, to rule over the earth, to be his co-rulers, and to take the raw materials of the garden and to make something useful with them. And so we actually have an important role to play, but it's one of partnership. I think maybe a good imagery as well is he is the architect. Yeah. He's the one we're looking to. But we are laborers, and he's invited us to be part of the building process.
Yeah. That's awesome. I just love that we're invited to partner with God.
Yeah.
sometimes we just don't even think about that, but
For
it's
sure.
like, wow, like we're joining the master builder
That's it.
in his work, and he's equipped us to do so with gifts and passions and burdens that he's laid on our hearts.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that includes church work and like
Yeah.
deliberately Christian work. But I think that also includes anything that is about the flourishing of the earth and people in general. You know, Tim Keller has a great quote about that work that glorifies God is anything that makes the world a better place and humans specifically to flourish. And so as we do those things, whether it's teaching or, you know, building spreadsheets and, you know, whatever it is.
Fill in the blank.
Fill in the blank. A carpenter, doing construction, setting up scaffolding to build something beautiful. Whatever it is that our work, if our work, you know, we often say around here, all good work is God's work.
Yeah.
And so we are partnering with God in his mission to renew and restore all things. And so we play an important role in that.
Amazing. Well, kind of the second part of the psalm speaks a lot about children, right? Like verse 3, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward, and just like the blessing of children. And I'm just wondering, Sam, like what are some key takeaways from this psalm with children?
Yeah.
What can we learn?
Yeah, it's interesting. A study I was looking at over this last week showed that birth rates are actually at an all-time low, especially in Canada and North America, that people are having less and less children to the point where we're not even keeping up with the needs for population growth.
Well,
And I think a lot of that is because, I'm sure there's many different reasons, but two big reasons that I think of is surrounding kids are often considered to be inconvenient. I think like people are like, well, you know, this is my dream and who I want to become, and a kid would only hinder that. This convenience. I think there's also, and the psalmist actually speaks to this one, there's a concern, especially living where we live, of safety and security and the need to provide for a family. And so having kids, it's like, well, I don't even know if I could have children and survive here in the Lower Mainland or whatever. And so I think one of the most countercultural things that Christians can do in a society like ours is to obey that first command and what the psalmist talks about here, and it's to have lots of children and then to train them and equip them in the way of the Lord. And so I think there's a few takeaways. One is have children if you can, and obviously there's lots to say there. There's people who have lots of deep hurt around that because they've wanted to have children and for whatever reason haven't been able to, or have miscarried, and there's so much grace and compassion we feel your hurt in that if you're in that place, and it's no easy thing, and I hate that even people in our community have gone through that, and yet we all have a role to play in the developing of the next generation, whether it's to birth children or it's to foster. There's some amazing families in our church who are fostering children and investing in the next generation, teaching them the way of the Lord. There's others who have adopted. There's others who, both single and couples who haven't had children, or who have, but who pour into the next generation through children's ministry and through being, you know, there's a Susan in our church has taken on the role of grandmother to my children and to many other children, and is investing and pouring into people in our church. And there's many others who do that same thing. And so we all have an active role to play in raising up and loving and caring for. That's what child dedications is often about, right? Is it's the parent saying, I'm going to raise my kid to follow Jesus. And it's also the church saying, we're going to partner and we're going to help. And we're going to be family to these kids. And I think what we see, the beautiful thing we see in the last verse of the psalm is when we do that, our kids go on to change the world and to advocate for justice and to, you know, make policy that makes the world a better place. And so I guess I say all that to say it is so critical for us as people and as a church collectively to invest into the next generation. They're not just the future of the church; they are the church today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's so many ties between Psalm 127 and 128, and I say this because I preach on Psalm 128, but like just seeing like some of the parallels, and then all the blessings about like, you know, children that come in Psalm 128, and the ability that we have to leave deposits for, you know, generations to come, whether that's biological children or, you know, children in the church. And so I think like we have the blessing and burden of helping disciple kids and love on them and care for them.
Yeah. So, and where the world says that kids are inconvenient or that you know, your security might be difficult to provide, Scripture says they are a blessing from the Lord. Yeah. And then even Psalm 127 says that God is the one who watches over us. And we think oftentimes that we have to be our provider and we need to make all these things happen, but the psalmist reminds us that, you know, we can try to keep watch over everything that we have and over our stuff, but if we do that without God, He's the one that's watching over it.
Absolutely.
He's the one that's keeping us safe and responsible for our security.
Good word, Sam.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, we'll leave it there and give you guys some time to discuss in your group. So have a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media, where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.